feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I've had a life in which I coached and played, and I'm having the time of my life.
Legendary NBA head coach Don Nelson passing away yesterday at the age of 86. An indelible mark on the NBA in general, the game of basketball, the Mavs organization, this city, this town. Obviously, some of the biggest players and names that have come through as well, like Dirk Nowitzki. It's impossible to try and wrap all of it up and do more than try and celebrate it, but we obviously will for the next couple of minutes here. Brian Dameris joining us. Thank you so much for taking the time on this Monday. First, let's get your reaction to the news that happened, and how will you remember Don Nelson?
You know, it's funny, when I started the Mavs in 2002 as the first analytics guy in the NBA, I was 31 years old, and Nelly had been in the league as a player, coach, general manager longer than I had been alive. And it could have been really easy for him with this new owner to come in and kind of dismiss this young punk with his spreadsheets and ideas. But he was always so welcoming to me, always so great. And even those clips you were showing, which was when he was honored with an award back in June over at Gillies, you know, I got to talk to him then, and I was just hearing that news. It had been many years since I'd seen him and talked to him, and I was just so glad I got that final opportunity to tell him how much he meant to me.
Obviously, since the news broke, everyone's kind of talked about his impact on the game and how forward-thinking he was. As someone that did work with him, what was it like working with someone that did have that kind of eye for where the game was going?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about small ball. Small ball didn't start in Golden State with Steph Curry. Small ball started with Nelly. You can go back to the first Golden State and run TMC, and then on to the Mavericks. When I was there, I mean, we were running, you know, Eddie Naher at the 5 and kind of running a small set like that. And then what he was able to do with the We Believe Warriors and take it through there, being blessed enough to watch his practices. And you know, he was a mad scientist. He knew exactly how to set up the play to get the mismatch, to get the ball and the shot that he wanted. And, you know, you really look, this whole game now is spacing big men. If you're a big man that can't shoot, your time is limited here. And the first shooting big man was that man on the screen to the left, Dirk Nowitzki. He came in with the perfect skill set for what Nelly could offer. And he embraced the fact that he was a faced basket outside shooting big man. And it literally changed the game of basketball.
Jonah, go ahead.
Dirk. Yeah, I think we've got that Dirk. Can we pull up the Dirk tweet that he shared yesterday about Nelly's passing? Because it kind of touches on what you're saying, BD, is that you know, Dirk even himself doesn't think he would have turned out the player he would have if it wasn't for Nelly giving him that freedom to just be who he was. You know, as somebody who was kind of on the inside, you know, during Dirk's early years, you know, what was sort of that freedom that Nelly allowed him to play with?
Yeah, you know, honestly, I think if he had gone almost anywhere else, they would have forced him to be Karl Malone, which is, you know, back to the basket, kind of traditional post-up power forward. That just wasn't who he was. Now, he became that player, but it was after confidence and, you know, the success of where then he could believe in himself to turn, and Avery Johnson was a big part of that. So then he had an inside game and an outside game. But in the beginning, if somebody had come in and tried to turn him into that, I think he may have gone back to Germany. And if you look at that rookie year, he brought him off the bench. And then those final 5, 6, 7 games, final couple of weeks, you know, he scored 28 points in a game. And Nelly said, see, you're just being yourself. You found who you are. Now go work on your game this summer and come back and let's ball. And that's when things really took off, and they almost made the playoffs that second season. And then those shots you're showing right there over the first round win over Utah was in their third year together.
That is kind of the perfect segue, though, because I do want to bring up the Karl Malone incident, because it seems like the kind of perfect encapsulation of Don Nelson's aggressiveness and his attitude on the sideline. He didn't care about mixing it up with anybody. Let it be Karl Malone, where, about as ripped as a human being could be. We showed Myles Garrett a little bit. Karl Malone could give him for a run for his money in terms of raw muscle. And
here's what's interesting about that clip. That was the first game that Mark Cuban was the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. I went to that game because Mark said, "You're buying season tickets because, you owe me." And I was like, "Yes, okay," because 8,000 people were going to games then, right? And Mark, no one knew who Mark was. I mean, he was this guy. Nelly and Donnie Nelson thought they were getting fired, and that was the first game. And Mark is sitting exactly where he sits now, right there on the baseline. And Nelly had chest bumped Karl Malone in that game. And when he got booted and walked off, Mark high-fived him. And I turned to my brother, who I was at the game with, and I said, "Nelly ain't going anywhere." That was brilliant.
But that kind of attitude, right? That player-coach mentality, where I think so much of it boils down to he did live the game. He had that experience as a player, 5-time NBA champion. How much do you think that influenced how forward-thinking he was on that front, and his ability to connect to players even on that level?
Yeah, he kind of had that Popovich mentality where I'm gonna slap you on the butt when I need to, but I'm also gonna hug you when that I care about you as a player. You go back to the 2003 Western Conference Finals, where Dirk Nowitzki got injured in Game 3. We're down 3-1, and 3-2 rather. We've got to win that Game 6 at home. And Dirk had worked out against the San Antonio Spurs. He wanted to play, and Don Nelson said, if he plays, I'm not coaching this game. I care about your career more than I care about this game. That shows you a lot about who he was.
Yeah, him being indelibly linked to the Popovich of it all, I think, is fascinating, because Nelly was one of the ones to congratulate Popovich on breaking the all-time wins record. So it always felt like there was an awareness of where he sat in the NBA, not the NBA pecking order, but in terms of NBA history. He appreciated his own role on that. I also get the sense that no matter how many times we bring it up, he did feel the love from everyone that radiated around him. This isn't a situation where we're doing this post-mortem for someone that never really experienced it. He had the experience in June. He's felt this from players and coaches around him his entire life, and you could, at least coming from the outside looking in, it feels like he had a sincere appreciation for that.
Yeah, and what I really liked, and you played it in that clip, he's the luckiest guy in the world, as he said. I mean, he really felt he had a complete life in playing and coaching, and then with his family. I mean, I went to Hawaii, gosh, this is probably a decade ago, and I sat on the porch with him, and I did things that aren't legal in this state, and he was so welcoming to have me there, and I'm a guy that worked there 20 years ago with him. He's seen a ton of people like me, and he went to, it was funny, he went to play he would say, "Well, I got to go play poker with Willie," and I wanted to get invited, and I kept saying, "Man, I love poker. I try to play poker every time I can, and man, I love to play the game." And he looked at me and he said, "All right, well, see you later." And I was like, "Dang it, I didn't get the invite to the poker match." But he was a great guy, and he actually used the analytics and the numbers. There were times where he'd come to me and be like, tell me what's going on here and how can this help? And there were some key things that I can point to that he instituted because of what I showed him, because he was that mad scientist that was willing to try things and really had a genuine feel for the game.
I think a lot of people forget that Nelly could hoop, right? And he won 5 championships with the Celtics during some of their prime years. He was around some supremely talented players in Boston and an organization and Red that just, breeded success at that time. And I wonder how much of that do you think kind of rubbed off on him and led to kind of his coaching style? And I guess a lot of it is probably intuitive if you're, on a 5-time championship team, but it just felt like if you come from that kind of squad that you're going to bring something to an organization as a head coach.
Yeah, and you see that, not all these ex-players turn into really good coaches, and he was someone who's instrumental to those Celtics wins and those championships, and was able to take that and translate it to what he did in Milwaukee. I mean, those Milwaukee teams with Sidney Moncrief were phenomenal. And so the DNA that he learned from Red Auerbach and from playing with Bill Russell and winning those championships and being a part of really important moments, the famous shot that he had in one of those wins, one of those titles. And then just never really playing with the superstar of superstars. We had Nash and Nowitzki. That was really early in their career, and Sidney Moncrief was he was putting people around him in the Run TMC, and then later the We Believe was kind of a makeshift team. He wasn't going and just doing superstars and Jordan and Kobe Bryant. He was putting teams together and being inventive because he had to. He didn't have the big man, the really good big man, so he invented small ball and the ways to play like that. And so, when you really look at the sense of humor, the heart that he had, the wisdom, his ability, he changed the game in how he coached and played. And then just that sense of humor that we talked about and the man that he was, that is just, but in both areas to be that impactful is really special. And his son Donnie, who, look, without the Nelsons, there is no run that eventually ends up in the 2011 title, period.
Yeah. And Brian, touching on what you said earlier and what you just said about the man he was, I mean, I grew up, I would like to say the golden era of the NBA, the 90s, the Jordan era, where I grew up in northern Indiana, a fan of Jordan and the Bulls, and I can, you can name so many players from the 90s. I can name a handful of coaches, whether it's Phil Jackson, Pat Riley, Lenny Wilkins, but Don Nelson is right up there with them. The fact that he is memorable in a period like that, and you talk about the players wanting to play for him earlier, the man he is, he just seemed, and I think he's memorable for me and people that grew up in that area because, he was just so authentically himself. How much do you think that leads guys to want to work hard for a guy like that? Not just that, but just having someone that cares about you like that and is not hiding anything, is just putting himself out there. How much does that motivate guys to want to be a part of that?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I maybe took for granted until I got inside the locker room and saw how things work, is how important relationships are in the coach-player dynamic. You can't just be that X's and O's guy anymore. That just, and then not really have the social skills to develop those relationships. You're also not just a walkover players coach. It's that line of, we talked about, I show I care about you, but here's what I demand of you. And the locker room that Nelly ran was loose. You had fun, but you showed up on time. And if you're 1 minute late, you got fined. You didn't use your cell phone at all. You worked hard. But practices weren't 3 hours long. They were an hour and a half. And, and then, afterwards he's cracking a beer after the game and joking around. And if it's a loss, they're working on what they need to do for the next one. But it was really that appreciation, because he was the first coach I had when I entered the league. I mean, he was the coach when I started with the team, and it was intimidating. But he was, from how he treated his staff to the players, that really kind of set the bar for me of what I want and expect in how things are done.
Two things out of that. We're talking relationships, obviously, from the foundation of the Mavs' greatest player, Dirk Nowitzki, during that draft, but also had enough of an impact and met with Luka Doncic. He was one of the few during that time frame affiliated with the Mavs organization to quote-unquote protest. He wore shoes in protest of it. I believe it was right before the NBA Finals that year in 25. But Luka posted his own tweet because they did have a bit of a connection as well. He said, it's a sad day for basketball with the passing of Don Nelson. I have so much respect for him and everything he did for the game, especially the way he believed in international players. I'm grateful for the time I spent with him, thinking of the entire Nelson family today. Love getting to know you. And that's just an example of, he didn't coach him, but he was around him. He had that kind of indelible mark on the organization as a whole. And it's funny kind of looking back at some of the VO, and just to peel back the curtain a little bit, when we're getting, VO elements or voiceover elements or video elements from other stations, we kind of tend to get them from California stations, so we're getting the Warriors side of it too. But he is this central figure in two franchises. As much as this is a Mavs discussion, he is absolutely a central figure in the Warriors build as well, in two different ways. And having that connection through two different cities when some people only ever reach one and only ever get that kind of foundational respect in one city, I think speaks to how diverse his range was and how important his reach was all across the NBA.
Yeah, and you look at from that picture with Luka, Donnie was the one who drafted Luka. If you remember, Luka, when he was, the draftniks were saying, "Oh, he's probably hit his ceiling. He doesn't have the prototypical body." He was number one on the Mavs draft board. Number one. If we'd had the first pick, you're picking him. He went third. The Mavs traded up because Donnie Nelson, who wanted Giannis to be the draft pick, and that wasn't done, said, "Remember that? Well, it's this guy again. I'm saying it again. Let's not screw it up this time." And he was, because he was raised by Don Nelson, key with international players. And you look at the international game, when's the last time we've had a domestic player win the MVP? It's been dominated by international players. And that man on the right, Donnie Nelson, was key to that. And it was because of how Don Nelson was. If you look at the recruiting of Dirk Nowitzki, Nelly went to Würzburg before the draft and was like, "I really want you to come here." And Dirk was in second division Würzburg German basketball and was really unsure about coming to the NBA. And Nelly put the time in with him ahead of time, saying, "Listen, I believe in you. I believe you can do this," and believing in what an international player can be, and thinking outside of the box of what the game was and thinking ahead. Where's the game going? And so when you look at Wemby and Jokic and Luka and all those guys, they're looking at Dirk as their role model of guys who they looked up to, and that's why this game is so radically different than it was in the 90s when you're just pounding it down low with a big man or having a skilled guy like Jordan try to go one-on-one.
One of the my memories as a kid watching Mavericks basketball was tuning in and the entire team being international. You could always count on, like, they would have maybe two guys from the U.S., but it felt like the entire team was from abroad, and they were just all so good and unique in their own ways. Because we think about the Dream Team, we think about the 92 Dream Team as really expanding the game globally, which they obviously did. But in terms of bringing international players physically to the league, it feels like the Nelsons were instrumental in that regard, and that a lot of these pathways may have been longer delayed for some of these guys like Jokic and Giannis, like you mentioned, BD, that who knows how long it would have taken for them to come if there isn't a Dirk to help pave that path.
Well, you look at what Donnie did with the former Soviet, Soviet bloc countries that got free in the late 90s, early 90s, really. There's a documentary called The Other Dream Team about Lithuania, and Donnie was the assistant coach for Lithuania for many years when they almost knocked off the U.S. in '92. And so that was, he was the one, Donnie was the one who went and got the first players from the Iron Curtain. I worked with Donnie. Donnie did it, but I was working for him when he brought the first Wang Zhuzhu, the first Chinese player ever, to the Mavericks. And then Yao Ming came after that. When China got the Olympics, they didn't have a basketball program. In 2008, they had to have a ready-to-go basketball program. They had their training camp in 2003, 2004 here in Dallas, coached by Del Harris, who was an assistant under Nelly, with Yao Ming, to just get up to speed so they could play in the '08 Olympics. Now you look at China. The Rockets are playing in Macau this preseason. The China market's 15% of the NBA because of the work that Nelly and Donnie did to open up these markets. And so, again, you're talking about visionary writ large, visionary on the court, the people that they were, and then the funny moments, getting tossed from games because he's like, I got to mix this up, and you just kind of knew there was always going to be. Nelly said he had a 6-shooter. You could do that 6 times a year where you could go out your players or get tossed to try to change the momentum or do something like that, and and it's just the whole package. It's really look, he lived a good long life, but so this is why it's a celebration rather than something sad. But it's someone you're going to miss that really one of those characters of the NBA that made a real impact and made an impact in my life in a big way, and I know in a lot of people's lives.
Dameris, you keep setting me up for some of these side examples, so let's pull up 29 sides just to give people a taste of what Don Nelson was like getting ejected from a game.
Throw the elbows here. You're not supposed to be able to do this. Right there. Had he
rung up for a towel. He's going to get tossed here. Roberts, it's been a very forgetful night.
Nowitzki commits a foul. He pounds the ball into the floor and gets a tee for that. And then Nelly takes the ball away from Nash. The Cowboys are looking for a field goal kicker, aren't they?
Or a punter.
That's not
pretty
bad.
good form.
Nelly, take it easy. You're going to pull a hammy there, buddy.
Pretty good form for a guy 6'1".
He kicked it really well.
Del Harris is laughing.
Exactly.
Donnie was
like,
on the
I'm
bench
getting
there
tossed,
like,
Nash,
oh my
give me
gosh,
that
what is
ball.
my dad doing?
But he knew exactly. He was protecting Dirk, right? He's like, I'll take this. You don't take that. I used to sit behind the bench. My job, real complex job, because I was the stats guy. So I was, my job was not during the game. During the game, I counted deflections because deflections were key to steals and they were a big thing. And I was counting them in real time. So I just had a little thing. And we would always stand up after, during timeouts to kind of block, people from spying and whatever. And I had nothing to do during timeout, so I would doodle in my notebook just so I wasn't, because if things weren't going well, Nelly would just he wouldn't say anything. He would just sit there really angry, and then maybe when the buzzer would ring, he would yell to players about something, and he'd look around, and one time I made eye contact with him, and I'm like, oh, I don't do that because he's gonna blame, like get out of here, or whatever. But he was just, he was very emotional, but that whole thing where he would kind of do that chest out, and you knew when he wanted to get tossed, right? That's why no assistant coach was kind of helping him till later, because he wanted to protect his guy, and that's what he was doing there, and sometimes he would yell at Dirk at practice Dirk didn't do anything wrong, but he just yelled at him to show, hey, I gotta yell at you too, just to make sure that everybody knows.
Tim Duncan approach, yeah.
We're all in this together. Dirk's like, what? I'm fine. It's like, just you turn later, just don't worry about it.
Brian Dameris, thank you so much for helping us walk down memory lane and remember the great Don Nelson. We're going to continue this throughout the week, I'm sure, as we keep reliving what he meant to this Mavs organization and the NBA at large. Brian, again, thanks so much for making the time on this Monday to talk with us.